And Rangi, I'll ask you to unmute. Rangi might have prepared a haka. I'm not sure. Let's see. Gave us a beautiful prayer and a song this morning. So thank you. Rangi, over to you.
Okay, thanks, Tony. Thank you to the committee. My name is Rangi Marie. I'm an alcoholic. Truly grateful to be able to introduce our next speaker on the topic of the good that has always been there. I met our speaker at the first New Zealand rally, but I'd met him many years earlier, listening to his speaker tapes. He truly, when AA presents a lot of space from the removal of my defects of character, this man over the years has taken my hand and walked me through the grace that's been presented. Truly grateful. So I met him in New Zealand, and I sort of thought I better step back and watch this person. And I noticed that he doesn't like people fussing over him, which suited me down to the ground because I don't like fussing over people myself. So we spent a few days in the car in total silence until we were ready to talk spirit to spirit, and I fell in love yet again in AA. I love this man. That he's a private man who loves his family, loves AA, and has so many questions about life that would drive Google out of business. Yeah, it's an honour and a privilege to introduce our next speaker, Bob B. of St. Paul, Minnesota. Thanks, Bob.
Thank you, Rangi. I'm Bob. I'm an alcoholic. Service of the grace of God in AA since the 10th of December, 1967. For that, I'm very grateful. Rangi and I have a love connection. It is, like many of us that are active in AA, I have a very busy life. I don't walk around with extra spaces for new people. But as you go through the experience, what happens is God just kind of shoves a new person in line. And Rangi was one of those people for me. He will be part of my life for a long time. I enjoy it. Thank you, Darren, and Tony for the opportunity of having that happen. I'm supposed to talk a little bit about, I'm not sure what, about the goodness that is already there, and that's what our spiritual journey is. In order to do that, and I probably shouldn't have listened to Katie and Charlie. I get so impacted by what's happening around me that I'm not sure now I can do what I need to do. I'm going to start out and I'm going to tell my story in about 20 minutes. And then I'm going to talk about how that relates. And I think you need to know, I'm sorry for the people who have heard my story a lot. I started drinking when I was a freshman in high school, 4'11", 95 pounds, went to a military high school. On a college campus, we drank in high school we had fraternities. When we drank in high school, like most people drink in college. Our parents were those Second World War people that drank hard, played hard, made life look pretty damn attractive. I love booze. From the very moment I drank it, I was always kind of insecure being 4'11" in high school. Booze, just from the very moment I did it, it just altered the way I saw everything, especially the way I saw myself. I was significantly displeased with what I saw in myself. By the time I finished high school, my drinking problem was a really loud noise in our family. I'm one of 7 kids. We lived in a Catholic ghetto. If you had less than 7 children, you had a reproduction problem. I mean, literally the families, 5, 8, 10, 14. I mean, they were, large families were kind of the order of the day. It was a wonderful time to grow up. But I had drinking problems significantly. I got arrested a couple of times in high school, once in high school. Car accident problems. I had a chance to get away from, my parents were very worried that I had a drinking problem. I just couldn't buy that. I didn't think I was drinking much differently than they were. Yeah, but I was a 17-year-old kid for God's sakes. So I finished high school. I had a chance to go away to school. Thought my drinking had become normal. And I went down to the University of Notre Dame and I became the class drunk. It's kind of hard to be class drunk in a major university, but I think I did a pretty good job. I was in civil engineering, carrying 25 credits a semester going to school, maybe one day a week. I started out going to all my classes. I ended up not going at all. And I can kind of make that sound funny, but it's not fun being the class drunk. It's not fun being less than. It's not fun not measuring up. You start out, thinking you're pretty smart, and then you end up being just a bozo. And I had so in the middle of my senior year, I walked out. I remember going to my rector and telling him I was leaving. He said, "You can't leave, for God. You're in the yearbook. Why would you leave? Just get up tomorrow and go to your classes." Well, I didn't know where they were. So that was a pretty difficult thing for me to do. And I left. And I was due to be commissioned in the Army. I was in ROTC, and if I, broke my contract. So now I'm facing Vietnam. I come home. I got a release from the Army for alcoholism. I was diagnosed an alcoholic when I was 17. I thought that was a joke also. I came home to a set of very disappointed parents, and I finished school at a local university. And when I finished school, my dad asked me to leave home. He said, "We love you, but we don't know what the hell to do with you." And I went out and I got a job at a liquor store. Now, this last year of my drinking is the Vietnam War is on. I'm going to get drafted. There's no sense getting a job. So I got a job at a liquor store. I worked there for 6 or 7 months. I got in trouble. I got fired. I got a job as a waiter, living downtown Minneapolis, living on Skid Row, $10 a night rooms. I'm shacked up with waiters. Dr. Seuss, that child author, those are actual photographs of people I lived with during that period of time in my life. I'm drinking a fifth a day. No one knows where I am in the family. That's just fine with me. I'm so ashamed of myself. I could hardly look in a mirror. I'm a drunk, and I'm a waiter. I mess myself once in a while on the floor. There's every bit of indignity that I went through. At any rate, I got fired as a waiter. And about that time, I went over, Linda and I were driving downtown Minneapolis, and I forget which building it was. I think it was the old courthouse. And I went over to the old courthouse to check on my file. I got accepted into officer candidate school. I'm getting ready to go sign up and go to NOM. And they lose my file. They asked me to take the physical again. I take the physical for the 4th time, and they fail me for a hearing problem, for God's sake. Now I don't have to go to Vietnam. I get back together with Linda, and during this time I've got a job. So I go get a job as an executive trainee in a manufacturing concern. I buy an automobile. I get back together with Linda, and I thought, holy buckets, you're going to be a grown-up. Only I can't quit drinking. I had, just before I went back to my senior year in college, I was beaten up, robbed, rolled, pistol whipped, shot at, thrown out of the 2nd story of a hotel. I ended up in a psych ward. And they were not going to let me go back to school. I talked my way out of that to let me go back. I didn't drink for, 2 or 3 months. And I thought I proved 2 things to myself. Was number 1, I quit. I can quit. And number 2, you're telling me that what's wrong with me is drinking. I'm still a jerk. My life is still a mess. I still can't perform. And, so booze is not, there's something else wrong with me. There's a built-in failure mechanism. I don't know what the hell it is. I hate it as much as you hate it. I don't understand it. So now I don't have to go to Vietnam. Now I got this job and I can't quit drinking. And I'm just a mess. And in my family, if you don't take care of your wife, you better move. They liked her better than they liked me. This was not going to be a fun deal. And so I had that job for about 6 months as an executive trainee. And when I went back to make amends with the guy who hired me, He said, God, you interviewed so well. And I said, yeah, we do. We interview well. We have performance issues, but we interview well. I quit that job. I got a sales job, and I got the sales job for about 2 months, and I went out on a 4-day drunk. And I woke up, 9:30, 10 o'clock in the morning, having missed work for the last 4 days, a Thursday in July of 1967. And that was my moment. God, I was tired of me. God, I hated me. I was hugging the toilet, doing my morning exercises, and that was my moment. And I got the telephone, and after making a couple of false calls, I got connected with Intergroup, and they sent 2 guys out to meet me at a broiler for dinner at about 5 o'clock in the afternoon. And one guy had 6 months, one guy had 6 years. They sat me down in the booth. They said, we're from AA. We got a drinking problem, found an answer for it, want to share it with you. And in 45 minutes, they changed my life. One guy had 6 months and one guy had 6 years. And they said, we hope you like what we're telling you, but if you don't worry about it. It helps us talking to guys like you. They told me their story. I had never talked to another person who had a drinking problem, and they changed my life. We have many traditions in AA, the best of which is that we share our experience, strength, and hope. Not our philosophy, not our ideology, not our beliefs, not our dogma. I could have walked out of that meeting and not wanted to do what those guys recommended, but I knew it was the real deal. We have a very good BS detector. These guys are right on. I went to my first meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous that night. I met my sponsor. I drank twice after that night. Once after a month on a business trip to the West Coast. So stupid. I'm in Brentwood, and I don't go to a meeting. And then I come home. I'm sober 3 months, and my wife and I got married, and we honeymooned in Acapulco, and I got drunk on our honeymoon. I think I had that planned. It was subconscious. I didn't tell anybody about it, and I had my last drink on the airplane on the way home. I turned myself into my sponsor, and I said, okay, I buy it without question. I'm an alcoholic. He took, and I said, I don't know what to do with my life. I mean, I really don't. And he told me that if I came to Alcoholics Anonymous, attended a dozen meetings, I'd make my own diagnosis as to whether I was an alcoholic, and I had done that. And in those days, the groups that I went to, 95% of the meetings were closed step discussion meetings. All we talked about were the steps. Charlie would come in, he'd have the step. He gave a 5 or 7 minute pitch on the step, and then we'd break up into upstairs and downstairs, and we'd finish the meeting talking about how the step operated in our life. So we had a very strong exposure to what I think the recovery program of Alcoholics Anonymous is. Now, all my life, or since the time I was 15 years old, people have been talking to me about what's wrong with me is drinking. And now I'm not drinking. And my attitude was kind of, when I came back, I said, I buy it, I'm an alcoholic, but if I'm an alcoholic and AA's got the answer, I got a half a dozen other things that are going on in my life, and if AA works, those ought to be taken care of, and hell, it might take a year. Yeah, it might take a year. It might take 53 years is what the hell it might take. So now I'm talking, when Katie was talking, she was talking about how the first 3 years, or how vulnerable we are. I think in my case, I'm going to tell you that I didn't really turn the corner until I was 7.5 or 8 years sober. I was 23 when I came in. And I think it took me longer because of my age and immaturity. And so my problem, I was a money spender. I spent more money than I made, I got a work problem. I have trouble getting to work, I have trouble staying at work, and I have trouble working at work. Other than that, I'm a pretty good worker. That was the thing I was most ashamed of. It was, my mother always said, you're not very bright, Bob, dress well. And I was a kid who always looked good. I mean, I overdressed. I worked at a clothing store in college. I always looked good. And I was a suit. There was no one home. I mean, I was as confused by my inability to effectively live life as my parents were and as my brothers and sisters were. And, I'm a husband who's not helping. We started to have kids. My wife is an RN. She's getting up at 6 in the morning. I'm getting up at 9:30 and going into work, or, maybe. And I don't know. It just is so, we started to have kids, and I wasn't the parent that I wanted to be. I wasn't the husband that I wanted to be. I had the work issues. I had, my second and third year, these issues started to eat my lunch. My fourth and fifth year, they were really a significant issue with me. What was happening to me in AA is you got me just well enough to not like me very well. And it was kind of like it was in my drinking days. In my drinking days, I was so ashamed of my behavior and consequences. Now, all of a sudden, I'm ashamed of my sober behaviors and consequences. And I'm stuck. I'm just, now I'm telling my sponsor 35% of what's going on, and I know you guys tell your sponsor everything. I'm only telling myself 35% of what's going on. Life is lived forward, but it's understood backwards. You don't see it when you're in it. And it is, and that's why it's almost like you're living in a fog. You're sleepwalking through your life. And as Katie talked about, we know the words. Once you're sober 5 or 6 years, someone asks you to give a 5-minute talk on any step. You could give a 5-minute talk, and I could, or on any step. But my demonstration was lousy. I looked okay on the inside, but I'm dying. I'm not thinking about drinking, but at 7 years, I'm thinking about putting a gun in my mouth. I am so damn sick and tired of being a guy who starts well and never ends. I never finish anything. So here I am, and I didn't know what to do. I just, honest to God, I had great examples. I had, longtime sober people and I knew what I had to find out what God had to do with Wednesday. Now, but I couldn't turn myself into God with these 7 or 8 issues that I had in my life. I thought I had to get rid of 2 or 3 of them before I had the right to go turn myself in. So at least I looked like I was serious. I'm like the guy that Charlie talked about who kept making promises to, quit, or promises to quit this, promises to quit that. And I never did. And finally, out of desperation, I had gone through the steps twice, and finally, out of desperation, without knowing what to do, I decided that the only thing I knew what to do is go through the steps one more time. And I went through the steps for the 3rd time, sober at 8 years. And it transformed my life. Step 1, powerless and unmanageable. Anybody with a room temperature IQ could have seen that I was powerless and unmanageable. My life was coming apart at the seams, and I didn't know what to do about that. What was interesting to me is I lost step 2. I believe step 1, but I did not transfer. Now, if you're really powerless and you're really unmanageable, you need a manager. You need a power greater than yourself in your life. And I had lost that connection because I'm 8 years sober and my cancer and fire, my life falling apart. And I think when you're more or less active, you get more active, and I got more active, and I started to go to meetings, and I started to see people with bigger problems than I had, with smiles on their faces, walking through the walls that I was trying to avoid, with dignity and grace. And I came to believe that God would restore Bob to sanity, not us, not you, Bob to sanity. I took step 3 on my knees with my sponsor in his office. We didn't do that much in those days, but I started to hear the California people do that, and I was going to dot the I's and cross the T's. And then I started into my 4th step. And in our group, you did your 5th step with clergy. And now I'm starting to see all these people around the country that are doing their 5th, 4th, and 5th, doing their 5th step with their sponsors. And I decided to do that with my sponsor. The previous 2, I did it with priests. And I went to my sponsor and I said, I want to do my 5th step with you. And I said, I feel like I'm dying of thirst lying next to a lake. I said, if you came to my house and told me the problems that I have, I think I could give you words that would be fairly good. I either can't or won't do it. I am so bloody sick and tired of can't or won't do it that I could just crap. I think I'm ready to do whatever you would recommend. And I started my inventory process. It's the best inventory I've ever taken. And I did my first step with Warren. My sponsor was the 12-step champion of the Uptown group of Alcoholics Anonymous. He got sober in 1954. He was a Second World War vet, lost half his crew in a bomb disposal unit. He was a mailman. He wasn't the sophisticated guy that you might ask to be on top of the podium to give you a talk about the big book. He was my big book. He and his wife was Linda's sponsor. And in the 43 years that he was my sponsor before he died, never in those 43 years did we ever call up and say, can we come over? Where they said no, never, not once. And when we were done with that fifth step, we cried and talked a little bit. He said, you got a lot of problems about work, money, failure, and success. I want you to go find a psychologist that works with business people. I want you to go have this conversation with them about why you're so bollocksed up with this stuff. And then I want you to bring the conversation back to me, and we will recontextualize it in terms of Alcoholics Anonymous and the steps. I thought, oh, crap. The idea of getting outside help, it made it seem like I didn't have a good program. Hello. And, but I promised I would, so I did. And I get the psychologist, he wants to get Linda involved. I thought, oh, crap. When Linda's in the room, there's a whole bunch of information that doesn't seem necessary to get counseling, and a lot of it's embarrassing. I thought, oh, well, yeah. So Linda comes in the room, and he wanted the kids involved somewhat, which I thought was stupid. And I'm explaining to this guy that my life is on fire and it's falling apart. I'm explaining to him that my company's probably going to go bankrupt. I'm going to have to put my name on the paper and file bankruptcy. And I'm busting my ass 2 or 3 hours a day. And he looked at me and he said, why are you so afraid of failing? And it was like he punched me. I literally wanted to strike him. I mean, it was like he punched me in my solar plexus. And I kind of reacted negatively to him and, told him, you're a doctor. God, you file bankruptcy. You just wait 6 months and go down the hall, pound your sign on another door, and you're making $100,000. I'm going to lose everything I have. Nod your head up and down if you understand that. And he, what I discovered, if you can't fail, you can't play. Now, I'm a salesman who doesn't even make sales calls. I don't even take a chance you're going to drag me across the desk and force me to sell you something because I'm not there. That's how, what I discovered in that man's office was fear. Now, you think of a guy doing 3 inventories would know a hell of a lot more about fear. I did not. I'm a young kid. I don't know what fear was. Snake dogs and tall buildings. I did not have the insight into the fact that, what I discovered was I'm afraid of failure. I'm afraid of success. I'm afraid of work. I'm afraid of, being a husband. I'm afraid of being a father. I'm swimming in fear. Chamberlain talks about the 2 fish that are in the ocean, and the one fish looks over at the other and says, isn't the ocean wonderful? And the other fish said, what's the ocean? And that was me with fear. 2 weeks after that meeting with that psychologist, I'm in my living room after just a horrible day. I left work early, got up late, got to work late, left early, got in the backgammon game. I won $500. I missed dinner. I missed an AA meeting. I came home, got in a fight with my wife, and slapped one of the kids. One of those days you'd like to have videotaped and sent to the general service office to show it. And I sat in my living room reading the Bible. I'm just scraping the bottom. And I realized that I had tried as hard as I knew how to try to clean my act up, and I had failed. And all of a sudden, that seemed for me to be exactly where I was supposed to be, and I was given the opportunity to take the 6th and the 7th step. 6th step said we're entirely ready to have God, not Bob, and we're defects of character. 7th step said we humbly ask Him to shortcoming. I spent 8 years trying to get rid of them. I don't have the power, I have the responsibility, but it happens through me, not by me. I am the pipe, not the well. And that night I took the 6 and the 7. I quit gambling that night. I gambled 4 or 5 hours a day. I was making $5,000 a year playing backgammon. It was like a second job. I turned the checkbook over to my wife. I made appointments about going to work, staying at work, and working at work. I got a counselor on, that helped me be a better father. I started dating my wife every Friday night for the next 35 years. Something happened to me that night that was what Jung talked about. It was what Silkworth talked about. It was a total reorientation. It was a transformation. It wasn't just an improvement. It was more like a sex change operation. It was not a minor event. Everything all of a sudden looked very different. And as a result of it looking very different, I started to have a different engagement with life. I've always been smart. I've just never been effective. And one of the other things I did, I hired a woman to call me to get me up at 5:30 in the morning. I mean, how stupid can you be? I'm not getting to work by 9. So moderation, I hire someone to get me up at 5:30, and I go to 6 o'clock mass, 5 days a week. I'm at mass. At the end of mass, I go over to the side altar, and my prayer is, God, give me your mind. I don't know what to do, which was BS. I knew what to do. I couldn't or wouldn't do it. And I'll be damned. He gave me his mind, which had been there all along. I've always been smart. I just have not been effective. And what happened to me in the transformation of the steps, the alteration that happened to me at 8 years of sobriety, is God entered my life in a way. Now, when Katie and Charlie did such an effective job with 1 through 4, I don't believe that I could have had the impactful change that happened to me with 6 and 7 had I not had 1 through 5 current. I think one of the biggest problems that most of us have, so the reason I was surrendered, I didn't surrender. I was surrendered. It's like, when you're young, you hit bottom, you bounce back, you hit bottom, you bounce back. But I'll tell you, there comes a day when you hit bottom and a trap door opens and you keep going. Now that's where I was at 8 years. This was not a conditional surrender. I was done. And I think what happens when you're done, there's no condition of surrender. My ego was suppressed enough that I was able to stand in front of, when I made that statement, when I came in AA, I stood naked in front of my alcoholism, and I saw the truth of my alcohol. I thought I saw the truth of my alcoholism. At 8 years, when I surrendered, I stood naked in front of my life, and it altered me. It was a surrender that didn't just have to do with drinking. It was a surrender that had to do with every aspect of my life. And when Charlie so effectively talked about the powerlessness, the power to choose, when Katie talked about, that she couldn't stop starting, it is, when you really get it, how badly that you need a power greater than yourself. I'm 8 years sober. I'm going to 7 meetings a week. I'm sponsoring 15, 20 people. I'm starting to talk in AA. I'm active. I got all the merit badges. But my life at that moment was ineffective, every aspect of it. But when I made that surrender, and when I got through those first 5 steps, my life changed like it was on a lazy Susan. All of a sudden, I became the guy. I became effective. I became an effective salesman. I became an effective investment advisor. I was the guy who was analyzing the deals. I was the guy that was helping sell the deal with my business partner at 56 7 years of sobriety. Can you imagine that the two of us have 110 years of sobriety? We've been we just celebrated 50 years of business together last week. So when we talk about the changes that Katie was talking about and what Charlie was talking about, when they in such detail go through and take a look at the book, most of us take a look at that and take a look at the detail of it and say, I don't do all those things. I don't do as many as I think I should do. I'm not as effective. No wonder, Well, we know the words, but I don't think, I think the biggest single mistake that I see made ongoingly in Alcoholics Anonymous is that people are trying to use psychology and insight and intellect to deal with the spiritual program. It's not like I'm trying to be insincere. I mean, when I tell you that I could give a 10-minute talk on almost any subject in Alcoholics Anonymous, I could. But if I'm not demonstrating them, if those principles, spiritual principles, are not active in my life, I'm an empty bell clanging. It is not, there's no one home. It is that suit thing. It's looking good. It is not, and it is as personally confusing, because after you're sober for a period of time, I mean, that's one of the measurements that we measure how you're doing in Alcoholics Anonymous, how long you're sober. So when you're sober a dozen years, I mean, doesn't it look like you're doing the right things? And I had the merit badge. But you had, over a period of time, altered me in such a way that I had a way of knowing, access to a way of knowing. I mean, when you sit in a meeting and you hear someone say something that's so right on, it just like it punches you right in the chest. You don't go, oh, I like that, I'm going to write that down. You just know you've heard something that's possibly life-altering, and it's true and powerful, and you've never heard it before. It's like someone walked into a dark room and turned on a damn light and showed you what has always been in the room that you have never seen. Life-altering. A way of knowing that I didn't know I had. And that's what happened to me at that second surrender. And I think all of us, almost all of us that I've had contact with, have a second surrender some way in the deal. We are so unbelievably effective at dealing with the problems of life in the first 3 years of sobriety. It's just astounding to see how many problems that people deal with courage. It is really quite wonderful. But the second surrender, the surrender where you're in front of the things that are in the way of you being married, in the way of you being in relationship, in the way of you being effective at work, in the way of you having, I mean, life is just all relationship. And there's a deepening that we need access to. There's a deepening in the steps. When Bill wrote the book in 52, when he wrote the 12 and 12, and a lot of the most conservative members of AA don't like the 12 and 12. They think God wrote the big book, and they think Bill wrote the 12 and 12 in the garage. Bill says, I want to deepen and broaden. I see people who are depressed. I see people who are angry. They're sober. 1952, Bill's sober 17 years. He's looking around. He's seeing men and women. So I don't know if someone mentioned Chamberlain tonight, but they mentioned Clancy. Chamberlain altered the communication in Alcoholics Anonymous almost single-handedly. Now, Cecil and Holly Martin and, a bunch of other people that I love followed that path. And the talks used to be almost entirely drunk-a-lot. Start with your first drink, end with your last drink, and the last 5 minutes of your talk was about the wife, job, and kids. And all of a sudden, Chamberlain is talking about recovery and the steps, and he altered it, and people gave him a lot of crap. Why? Well, because it was the start of people being sober 15 and 20 and 30 years in the seats in the audience of the conferences. And it wasn't just that they wanted, to know the power of the first 3 steps as it relates to drinking. They wanted to know the power of the program as it relates to how we live life. And in order to discover that power, in some significant way, you have to surrender again. And how do you tell someone to surrender? I mean, it's of God. Where are the words? Well, we do it by example. And because the book is one of the most profound books that's ever been written, what's the nature of a spiritual book? I mean, the nature of powerful spiritual literature is that when you read it, you are altered. And when you read it in a reasonably paying attention, it's like it's new. It's like when you hear Charlie, Katie, different people talk about the book, it's like it's new. What page is that on? I mean, I've got my book open and I'm going through and following what they're saying, but it's like it's new because it is new. And I think cumulatively, what happens to us is we get soaked. We have the opportunity to be soaked in the program. I think the thing that keeps the program more alive than anything else is working with others. I think a lot of us exempt ourselves from that process because we think that you have to be as good as Charlie and Katie are with the book to do that. That's nonsense. We don't. All you got to do is stay one page ahead of the person you're helping, and care about the person you're helping, and share your story with them. It is a sloppy process, and you can't hurt a drunk. I mean, they're already doing more damage to themselves than you would ever dream of doing in the process of helping them. And I think the power of your story and the power of your life, the fact that they can take a look at you and know that you're a good person trying to be, and I really think ultimately sobriety and recovery is a matter about what kind of a man you want to be. What kind of a woman do you want to be? Who do you want to be? Are you tired of being an asshole? God, I was so tired of being a horse's ass. I was really tired. And I, again, can't stress the point that I'm making is the choices that we have in life is that you either run your life on your ego and intellect, or you run it on the program and God. And when you run it on ego and intellect, it's just too shallow. It's just not deep enough. Psychology becomes the religion of the day. And you've got the words, baby, but you're a hollow drum. It's not, there's no one home. You do not sound authentic. You do not sound like you have the integrity that we need to make the changes that we are. And life is presenting us with those changes all the time. But once you really get in the game, once that happened to me that I got in the game at 7 years, I most of the time endorse change. There are very few things today that I think I can't stand in front of. I mean, I've been married 53 years. We had 3 kids that at one time all were on the program. 2 are in the program now. I've lost my parents. Our daughter-in-law died in a homeless encampment after 7 treatments, the mother of our grandchildren. I mean, we all have experiences in life. And yet I feel blessed. I feel a lot of the conversations that a lot of us old people have is how the hell did we become so lucky to be able to be a member of Alcoholics Anonymous? Thank God that I was such a jerk that it blew my life apart in such a way that I had to find something to put it back together. And what I found was a party there myself. And that trip has been, it's like when you come in and you make your surrender and you decide to be a member of Alcoholics Anonymous, it's like an airplane drops out of the sky and they drop a shipping container in your front door. And inside that shipping container is a kit. It's a boat kit. It's a kit to build the boat that you can take on the journey for the rest of your life. Now, there are more damn people in Alcoholics Anonymous that have never opened that shipping container. Geez, I'm busy. Could I borrow your boat? I mean, the idea that they really would have to build it. I just want to strap a couple of logs together, throw them in the river, get going. I've really had a tough time the last 10 years. I don't have the time to build the damn boat. Now, you don't, first of all, you don't know how to build it. Secondly, you don't have to build it alone. It is, so I'm a guy that, you know, if I had to clean the garage, I would have to, every 4 or 5 years, buy a new house. I mean, I just can't do it. Now, if you came over to my house and wanted to clean the garage with me, I could do it. There is something about the fellowship. There is something about the relation. When I said that I love Rangy, I mean, how the hell do you find someone who you haven't spent that much time with, but you have a connection? Or Darren. It's about love. I mean, the process of the program is a movement towards love. It is, and in that process, you get softened. In that process, you get nicer. In that process, you're more attractive. In that process, now we do a lot of, so Katie, I think does more inventory than I do. But there is healing that takes place in addition to the formal inventory process that we're doing. I think in the taking of the steps, there are things that just fall off. As you grow towards God, there just become things that are no longer appropriate to your life, and they just fall off. And you look behind yourself every once in a while and say, I haven't done that in 6 months. I haven't had that issue. I used to have that issue daily or weekly. Now I don't have it almost at all. So I think the gift, I mean, it was kind of fun, you know, having a reunion of the speakers that were in New Zealand. And it was a wonderful, joyful experience for us. Your beautiful country is extraordinary. And it was just kind of magical being in Australia and New Zealand for us. It was very flattering to be treated to that. To be able to share the story. And sometimes I think the people in Alcoholics Anonymous are talkers. Forget how extraordinary, what extraordinary members they are of Alcoholics Anonymous. I have to be careful of myself. When I hear Charlie and Katie, I want to be as good as they are with the book. When I hear Bill Cleveland, I want the insights that Bill had. I want all those things. Well, I can't have all those things. I don't have the blessings or intellect or character of each of those people. I have what God gave Bob, which is just fine. It's plenty. And I'm comfortable with it. And I'm okay with who I am and what I have to say. You do not have to sponsor 30 people to have the blessing that we're talking about on the screen. It is not quantity, it is quality. But and it's the relationship with the God of your understanding. Somewhere inside of each of us is God. That knower that I was talking about, at that spot inside of us, the spot where the knower is, there's no separation between us and God. My spiritual advisor, who I had for 35 years, would say to me, Bob, you are God. And I said, oh, shit, George. I don't, that's just beyond what I said, sounds like heresy. He said, no, you're God. He said, if I took a cell out of your hand, everything inside that cell would be Bob Bisanz. But that cell wouldn't be everything Bob Bisanz is. But he said, you are comprised of God. Every change that I have been able to make, every growth process that I've had in this program, every wonderful change that has come into my life, and it would be, if I started to tell you about the wonder of my life, I could be on here for another hour and not complete that. It's happened through me, not by me. I have had a connection with the God of my understanding. And it's almost like running a car on empty. There's no gas in the damn car, and I could keep driving it because it's not I am not the power that is driving them. I am the vehicle. I'm the, you know, I need my body for the spaceship, but I'm on a spiritual journey. And it has been exciting and fulfilling. And I believe that everybody on this screen has their story. I mean, if you've been on this screen and you've been sober 6 months, you've got the power and the story. You've been changed, not in a small way. You've been changed in a major way. And you can go to detox. You can look at that newcomer at the meeting, and you can be a friend. You can maybe be a sponsor. And maybe being a sponsor is the seminal experience not to be missed. You don't have to sponsor a boatload of people. But I believe that in the teaching or sharing, whatever word you would like to use, you learn more in the process of trying to help someone else with their steps and their program than you ever have trying to read it and do it for yourself. It is an extraordinary experience not to be missed. So let's not settle for psychology. Let's not settle for intellect. Let's not settle for knowing. Knowing is the booby prize. What is the prize is the demonstration. Thank you. I'm done. Early, but I'm done.